Well, welcome to the second part of week number 2. We're going to look now at First Samuel, and First Samuel covers 31 chapters, which is quite a bit of geography or landscape within the Old Testament. Takes up a good majority of focus here, and so First Samuel and Second Samuel is about Saul, about David, Saul's family, David's family, and how God raises up a prophet named Samuel who lives through these two kings' ministry or reign over the house of Israel. And so we're going to spend some time looking at both of these sections in First and Second Samuel. Just know that in the Hebrew Old Testament, First Samuel is together one book. As mentioned in previous lectures, it's one book. We divided it into two separate books in our English Bible. So let's try to uncover. I want to look at God's promise person for all. I want to look at that theme as we transition here. So God's promise person for all is simply the beginning of the Davidic promise established here in this section of the historical book. Remember that God has promised the land and the kingdom. He promised that to Moses. He promised it to Abraham. And now there's again the reminder of this promise place that God's people would have. Remember in Joshua 9, chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, he says, I know that the Lord has given you this land. This is what Rahab's saying. And that a great fear has fallen on us. And so there's that reminder. Joshua 4 again, chapter 4, verse 23 through 24. God did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so you might always fear the Lord your God. Again, promise, land, kingdom, right? So this special people that God has set aside will experience this land and this kingdom for his glory. Of course, there is quite a bit of debate on the authorship and time of these two, what we call two books, First and Second Samuel. The writing is often linked, as the author would be Samuel the prophet, writing and also using a writing secretary. We do give a time stamp that's important. 1 Samuel 26:6 provides a reference point of the city of Ziklag. And we know that Judah takes that as a central city during possibly around the 930 BC. BC is always before Christ. So that gives us an important era as we would say, okay, when did Samuel rise up as the prophet of God, as a chosen spokesperson for God? When did David take his reign, or even when Saul took his reign as well? Now, here are some themes for you to note. We have the unfaithful leaders who are not doing what God has required, such as Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas. And these are two sons of Eli who should be following God's covenant requirements of his law. And what they're doing in chapter 2, as we learned early, is they're committing some just serious sin, committing sexual immorality. And because of this wrongdoing, God judges Eli's house. And he's going to use this young boy, Samuel, to bring about this judgment. Eli is going to die. And when he should be going and imploring that his son stop their gross behavior in the city square, but they don't, and so the judgment of God falls on Eli as a result. And so during these beginning scenes of First Samuel is now Saul is reigning over the house of Israel. We know that that's not God's plan. His plan was for himself, the Lord, to be the king over all. They don't need another king. God is their king. He is the owner. He is the one who brought Israel out of bondage. And so Israel begins to complain. No, we want to be like every other nation. And God says, no, you don't need to be like every other nation. You are mine. You're the apple of my eye. You belong to me. I will serve as a king. But they continue to rebel and they continue to complain. and this rises up. Give us a king, give us a king. And so God is looking for a leader. He's looking for the interior of the heart. And no, what's happening is man is looking at the outward appearances, and so they choose Saul, right? Saul is handsome, he's sturdy, he's strong, he's a man's man, and so because Saul is not God's chosen servant, and because Saul has heart problems, he's not going to lead well. And actually, his leadership is quite ugly as you think about the beginning to the end of Saul's reign. He just goes crazy at times. He usurps power away from the Lord and does priestly duties when he shouldn't be doing it. And he doesn't put down the idol worship in the land, and he hates David. Okay, and so, and even though David is a son-in-law, because we later find out that David comes from his father's land, and he sees the nation of Israel getting taunted by the hands of the Philistines. And Saul says, anyone can kill this guy. I will give you lands. I will give you my daughters in hand in marriage. And as a result, this is what he receives. But Saul dislikes David. And yet, finally, David will come into power toward the end of the book, and we'll get into 2 Samuel. And he is God's chosen king, a man after God's own heart. What a beautiful statement that is from the Lord. Should be statements for our lives as well. Now, we know that 1 Samuel is a period of transition from from the time of the judges. Now there is a monarchical rule coming into play, a dynasty of sort, and God is also raising up other people to speak on behalf of the Lord. And so Samuel's birth, chapter 1, becomes a significant time. Interesting that when Samuel is revealed is during a very difficult relationship that Hannah is having. She's unable to have children. She is getting older, and but finally she conceives, right? And so she's at the temple, and the priest thinks that she's drunk, and yet she says, no, I'm filled with the Spirit. I've been talking, pouring out my prayers to the Lord. And the beautiful thing is that God, in her distress and in her faith, grants her the child that she has been longing for. That's really chapter 2, the prayer of Hannah. My heart exalts in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemy because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord. There is none beside you. There is no rock like our God. What a profound prayer. You should read that in your quiet time, because this language comes up later on in the New Testament with also Elizabeth and Mary, who proclaim the Lord's goodness even when they find out they're going to expect a child and such. So chapter 1 all the way to chapter 3 verse 21 is the call of the Lord, and how God raises up this seed through David. David's going to be the rightful king over the house of Israel. But God's going to use some other people along the way to reveal his redemptive plan, his kindness and his mercy, to carry out his provision for the nation. And so we are already brought into another family dynamic where a man picks up two wives, Hannah and Elkanah. If you remember Elkanah, he has two women in his life, and Hannah is unable to have a child, and yet his other wife is able to bear children, and this becomes a problem. And often people will ask, why would God do that? Why would God allow? Well, God did not ordain that men have two wives, but Just know that that's the beginning days. It's a rough time. Remember, they're coming off the period of the judges, still people doing their own thing, and their allegiance is not toward the Lord. Other sections in 1 Samuel is that as the word of the Lord comes to Samuel chapter 4, the battle with the Philistines begins to take in more intensity than ever before. And so because of that, the Ark of the Covenant is taken away, and this becomes a significant milestone in the nation of Israel. Why? Because God dwells in these artifacts. You know, the Ark of the Covenant becomes a special feature. The tabernacle becomes a special feature in the Old Testament of his presence with his people. And when the Ark is now God, it seems as if the Lord has departed from the nation of Israel as well. Well, all of this is taking place as the Philistines capture the ark. You have the death in chapter 4. You have the death of Eli as promised, and that death sentence is coming through Samuel the prophet, who will announce to Eli that he will die, and because of their lack of obedience and turning from sin. Well, finally, in chapter 5, you have the Philistines and the ark of the Lord. You have the god of Ashdod, or the god of Dagon. It's flipped upside down. And this is all Ashdod the king. And so they're not Dagon. They bring the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. They do a mockery, and God does a miraculous thing, right? He causes the god of Dagon to fall down, and they don't know what to do. The people get warts, and they send rats are coming, and so all these things are fitting reminders of how God's glory cannot be taken away. And so finally, in chapter 6, we have the ark returned to the nation of Israel, and Samuel judges the house of Israel because of their sin. Matter of fact, in chapter 7, Samuel said, "Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." For they gathered at Mizpah and drew near and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said, "We have sinned against the Lord." And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. Now, when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, "Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." A wonderful chapter that you should, again, spend some time here addressing. And then chapter 8 is when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel, named judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons, and this is a good milestone marker again, yet his sons did not walk in the way, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and they perverted justice. And in chapter 8, Israel is demanding a king. They're wanting a king, and so they chose, they make a selection on the man Saul, and finally, that's how they are putting their affections toward. And so Samuel tells the people that they have sinned, reminds them as we move from chapter 8 into chapter 12. He is also pouring oil over Saul, anointing him for the office, and eventually we're going to come back to David as the rightful place of being king. Well, now David rises up, right? And then we eventually see Saul's decline as we get to the middle part of 1 Samuel. And one of the key features of this book is that you see the failure of leaders. David is anointed in chapter 16. And then the fitting section of 1 Samuel chapter 17 is probably the victory over Goliath. Here they're in the valley, and they're yelling at each other, and a mockery from one another. They're tossing threats back and forth. And David comes from his father's sheep and goats as he was shepherding, and he brings some cheese, and his dad wants him to bring some type of token back. And that's the scene of chapter 17. And he sees the Israelites fearful when they should be showing great resolve, and they should attack, and they should have faith that God will give them the victory. And hence that's the emphasis of this chapter, is that God, David's concerned about God not getting the deserved honor, and he's concerned about God's honor. That's what we see in chapter 17. He's also concerned about God's past faithfulness, that, this is the land, this is our land, we're going to secure it. And that's an encouragement for us as well, that we should take steps of faith like David does, and trusting that God's provision would be made. And then we also need to remember the battle belongs to the Lord, and that's hence what he says in the latter part of verse 47. He gives this cause back to the Lord. Verse 46, this is the day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give your dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, and that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and all the assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. So here's that direct statement that David exclaims, and he wants to make that a public announcement. Well, David struggles with Saul. There's that inner family dynamics. We know that Jonathan becomes a dear friend. Jonathan's Saul's son, and but this jealousy arises from Saul's heart. Saul has killed his 1,000, but David, he has killed his 10,000. Becomes that chant of the people of God as David rises up. Remember, David was a musician, loved playing instruments. He was a worship leader. Saul used him. Saul was comforted by David's playing of the harp and lyre, and that seemed to soothe his behavior. Some times theologians would say that he went neurotic in moments of his life. He was definitely filled with demonic spirits, it seems to be, and moved in such a way, often tried to kill David. And this led in him running away from Saul. And there were on a few occasions that David had the opportunity to kill Saul himself, but he resisted and gave that over to the Lord. We know that later on in chapter 25, as we move through this latter part of 1 Samuel, that David marries another woman, Abigail. Remember that David has multiple wives, and we'll later see that in the latter second division of 2 Samuel when he commits sin with Bathsheba. So he, again, has multiple wives, and he's carrying out his divine right as king in and against what God has mandated. Later in chapters 28 through 31, we have Saul's final battle. It is here at this point that Saul seeks after wisdom from the Lord, and the Lord doesn't answer him anymore. And again, the final kind of motto that's going on in the land, Saul has slain his 1,000, but David is a better warrior. David is a better king. He's a better servant of the Lord. Even in amongst all his failures, David serves better and serves out the ideals of what God was looking for. God was looking for the heart. He's always looking for the heart. He's not looking for outward, external attributes, but he's looking for internal attributes that are marked by him. And may that be your life as well. And what is God looking for? He's looking for a changed life, a changed heart as you walk with him. Now, again, I want to go back to this aspect as 1 Samuel chapter 17 probably is a center section of 1 Samuel. So if you were looking for the beginning of Samuel as a calling into his prophetic role, then now David rising up, and then this hinge point of 1 Samuel is him as a warrior king, right? He he announces to all, this is what he's going to do, sort of that victory song, the standoff between the Philistines and the Israelites. This day the Lord will deliver you is a promise. And he goes, I will strike you down. So he's showing himself to be a divine warrior king, and sort of like what Jesus is, as we see in the finality in the book of Isaiah. Later on, as we move toward the book of Revelation, Jesus, our warrior. He comes in the name of the Lord and in the battle of the Lord. Saul and David, again, are some given marker themes I've already stated. Some things I want to just show you that Saul is the people's king, so remember that, and David is God's king. Okay, so that's important to know. The people's king looks the part, plays the part. Chapter 10, right? He looks very kingly. He looks like he knows what he's doing. He has the allegiance of the people, and yet even the allegiance of the people begin to wane over time. And so that's chapter 10. And then in verse 22, he looks like he's one filled with humility, but yet he has a rebellious heart. He has not taken on God's heart. Is there a man still to come? And the Lord said, behold, he has hidden himself among the baggage. Then they ran and took him from there. And when he stood among the people, he was taller than any other people from his shoulders upward. And Samuel said to all the people, do you see whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted, long live the king. Okay. However, one of the things we know about Saul is that he is not one that honors people, and so he looks at situation rather than God. He looks at it from a man's point of view. We see that in chapter 10 again, all the way through chapter 13. His wisdom is very earthly, not spiritual. And then in chapter 13 is where God rejects man's decision, right? The people of the house of Israel. We go there in chapter 13, verse 13. He says, and Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be a prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord has commanded you. And Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal, and the rest of the people went up after Saul to meet the army. And they went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. And Saul numbered the people who were present with him, about 600 men. And Saul and Jonathan, his son, and the people were present with him and stayed in Gibeah of Benjamin. But the Philistines encamped around them. So God rejects his leader. And again, it's reminded of, and the reminder is given again in chapter 15, that Saul's kingdom is going to come to an end. Now, in chapter 16, the Lord is grieved, right? God's king, his chosen king, is going to come into focus in verse 11 of chapter 16. He's the youngest of the family. He doesn't look the part. He is valued by the Lord, and so the Lord honors him in chapter 17. And so he is the chosen one of God. God appoints him as king over Israel, and he becomes a loyal friend. He and Jonathan are loyal to each other, but he becomes one of hatred against the Lord's appointed king. So that's a little bit about chapter or 1 Samuel. As we look at the 24 chapters together, there's a lot here. I would commend you to read individually as we work together through this historical section in class. And in our next mini lecture, lesson number 3 for week number 2, we'll cover 2 Samuel together as we work together. So 31 chapters in total, 1 Samuel. And then 2 Samuel will cover the 24 chapters that belong to that next section of pretty much the latter half of David's kingly line and authority over the house of Israel.